Hello everyone, this is Sam McEwen, and today I'm going to be talking about the 5 rules to castling. Now if you don't know what castling is already, I suggest you go back in my videos and watch the basic castling, and then come back to this one so that you can learn the 5 rules. And so we're going to get started with our game, and we're going to say that white starts with e4, black e5, knight g3, knight f6, bishop c4, Italian game, knight f6, and now white is ready to castle because they have followed the first rule of castling, and that is that you can't have any pieces in between the king and the rook that you're castling with. And so you can see that white moves the knight and the bishop out of the way so that now he can castle. So that's the first rule. The second rule is that if your king or your rook have moved, you can no longer castle on that side. And so if I move my king here onto f1, I can no longer castle on either the king side or the queen side. However, if I move my rook maybe to f1, now I can't castle on the king side, but as long as I can get my queen, my bishop, and my knight out of the way, I'm still able to castle on the queen side because I haven't moved my a1 rook or my king. Oh. So we'll say that white does not castle yet, but instead plays pawn to d4. And then black plays bishop to b4. And that puts our king into check, putting us at the third rule of castling, and that is that you cannot castle out of check. And so since I'm in check, I can't castle anymore. But maybe I bring my bishop up to, or my pawn up to c3, they move their bishop back. Now as you can see, the laser's touching the c3 pawn, and so now my king's not in check anymore, so for this turn I am allowed to castle. So we have 3 rules so far. The first rule is that there can't be any pieces in between the king and the rook. The second rule is that the king and the rook cannot have made a move before they castle. And the third rule is that the king cannot castle out of check. Okay, so we'll keep this game going here. They go back, but instead of castling, maybe we will develop our bishop here. They can develop their, and these aren't the best moves that they can be making, but we're just going to go along with it for the purpose of this particular game. And then let's say that it's white's turn, isn't it? White develops his knight, their knight, our pawn, and then their pawn. Now this move right here puts us at the fourth rule of castling, and that's that a king cannot castle into check. So as you can see, our white bishop right here has a laser onto the g8 square. When black castles on the king side, he goes straight into our laser, and so that puts him into check. And that's not allowed. And that's why we say that kings cannot castle into check. And so you can't castle if there are pieces in between the king and the rook. You can't castle if the king or the rook have moved. You can't castle out of check, like we saw with this bishop when the pawn and the knight were in the way. And you can't castle into check, as you can see right here, when the black tries to castle on the king side. Then, let's see how we can set up this last one. We'll say that it's white's move, white captures, black captures, white comes up here, and then we can say that black comes down here to block this laser so that he can castle. But he actually cannot castle because as the king takes his walk into his castle right here onto g8, there's a problem, and that happens on the f8 square, because our last rule of castling is that the king cannot castle through a check. And as you can see, our bishop on c5 has its laser right up here to f8. And so when the king takes his walk into the castle, he walks right into the laser. So that is all our rules to castling. We're going to go back through them one more time. So the first rule is that you have to have all of your pieces out of the way. And so we have our knight and our bishop out of the way so the white king can castle now. The second rule is that if your king or your rook have moved, you can't castle anymore. Our third rule is you can't castle out of check. As you can see, there's a check right here now. The fourth rule, we can find it. There we go. Oh, here we go. Here's the fourth rule. The fourth rule, if black wanted to castle now, cannot castle because he's castling into check. And then the fifth and final rule, if we can get it set up, there we go. You cannot castle through check. Rule number 1, there's pieces in between. Rule number 2, if your king or rook have moved. Rule number 3, you can't castle out of check. 4, into check. 5, through check. Thanks for watching.